Innate talent or abilities with skills vary from person to person, both in type and magnitude of mastery. They can bring pleasure, and sometimes they can demonstrate authority to others. Depending on how the owner handles them, the results can be different. However, sometimes if the gift is too great, it becomes very difficult to control. And in the end, it turns a person's life upside down, leading to fame or destruction. This is what this story is all about. It was early morning, and our hero was sleeping on a mattress on the floor in a small room where everything was close together. Even the phone was charging from an outlet near his head. At one point, he took the phone off the charger. The screen lit up, showing that it was only 40 minutes past 4 in the morning. But this time, didn't seem to bother our hero's mother, as there were missed calls. But it struck the young man as if a light bulb went off in his head. How could this be? He had been discharged from the army. Pondering on this, the guy was already sitting on the bed, or rather on the mattress. He called his mother to ask why she was calling so early. After hearing some response from the other end of the line, our hero started talking about the need for more sleep because of his poor health. He then asked not to worry about medical bills and wished for a speedy recovery. And holding the phone to his face, he said he was fine and not to worry, then ended the call. He brought the phone to his face to check his balance. Approaching the closet, where there were many clothes hanging, the guy began to choose what to wear outside. During his jog, someone's phrase echoed in his head and he responded by saying, "When you're bored, go outside and get some fresh air." But the thing was, he couldn't remember who said it. The fact was that he didn't feel particularly invigorated. Arriving at the small shop where our hero worked, he began to prepare for the new workday and contemplate his finances. This month his salary would be around 180,000 won. Then he started allocating his money for necessary monthly expenses, including rent, utility bills, payment for housing based on size and sometimes the number of occupants, medical bills, and separate treatment costs. After a moment, he continued planning, taking into account the interest charged by lenders for the amount borrowed, assuming that it would be difficult to make ends meet until the next payday. After this thought, he considered finding another part-time job. His gaze was filled with despair as our hero tried to understand how much longer he could endure this. Picking up a can from the shop shelf, he tried to figure out what would happen if he showed determination and held on until the victorious end. Would the situation take a different turn? But as he contemplated this, the can slipped from his hand, and he was simply trying to figure out when that day would come. As he picked up the fallen can, he decided to focus on his current duties for now, and he should simply believe sincerely that if he persisted, someday something unexpectedly good would happen. Meanwhile, someone entered the shop and our hero greeted him. But it seemed that the guy standing over our hero was a bit surprised. He stood with his hands in his pockets and looked directly at the young man. After some time, he asked our hero if it was true that his name was Kang Woo Heik. The guys moved outside. The young man who entered the shop had already lit a cigarette and asked our hero, who was sitting next to him, if it was true that he had left the army. If so, why didn't he call? To this, Kang Woo Heik replied that he couldn't even imagine that this young man lived in the city, and then called him Sergeant Hyun Yoon Chan. After the statement, the sergeant leaned on our hero's shoulder and with a smirk on his face asked, "Why all these formalities?" and requested to be called simply Hyun Yoon Chan. And then he asked him to give it a try. At first, our hero hesitated. How could he just call the sergeant by his name? Watching Kang Woo Heik, the sergeant couldn't help but laugh. But after a moment, our hero managed to call the man by his name, and after that, he heard that it was a completely different conversation. After a brief conversation, they went somewhere, and the sergeant suggested his companion have a drink since fate had brought them together today. In response to this offer, our hero first apologized, then said it wouldn't work, but he would definitely try to contact him as soon as an opportunity arose. But the sergeant wasn't about to give up on him. He placed his hand with the cigarette on our hero's shoulder again. Then, with a smile, he started talking about how they used to be comrades and asked why some urgent matters had suddenly come up right after finishing their shift. Our hero clearly didn't like this behavior. On the other hand, Hyun Yoon Chan looked happier and suggested they go all out. Our hero succumbed to the persuasion, and shortly after, they stood at the entrance of a certain establishment. It was a pub called Peach, in the province of Pyeonghwa-dong. The sergeant suggested that the club would be perfect for their venture. Kang Woo Heik didn't say a word. Entering the premises, the sergeant was excited and exclaimed about how it was livelier than usual, but our hero remained silent, looking too subdued. Approaching the bar counter, the young men needed to order something. The sergeant asked what his companion would order, and Kang Woo Heik took out his wallet and, addressing the bartender, said he would have a bottle of beer, then asked if it cost 15,000 won. And why was he so concerned about it? We know. Hyun-Yoon-chan found this action amusing and asked if he always only gets one beer. To this, our hero replied that he didn't know much about alcohol. But the sergeant said that when you come to a place like this, you should stand out from the crowd. And he enthusiastically suggested having a bottle of Cru champagne, created in 1843 and made 100% from white or black grapes, which costs 300,000 won. Hearing this amount, our hero couldn't say anything, but the ecstatic sergeant couldn't contain himself. He enthusiastically said that champagne comes with sparklers as a gift. Hyun-Yoon-chan was eager to have that champagne with sparklers, so he already reached out to the bartender holding the champagne. But first, they needed to get all of that. The sergeant seemed to be stalling for time. He tried to find something in his back pocket and finally asked to wait a minute. Our hero observed the whole scene without saying a word. But it seemed that a brilliant idea came to our hero's companion, and with a sly smile he began a dialogue by saying that he had thought of something. And then he started saying that most likely he didn't have enough money because he made some important purchase earlier. He asked our hero to help him out and lend him some money, assuring him that he would return it soon. Kang Woo Heik looked at his companion with caution. Our hero started to refuse, but his persistent comrade was already standing right beside him, placing his hand on his shoulder. He tried to persuade his former comrade, relying on the fact that they couldn't even occupy a table without alcohol. Then he suggested that Kang Woo Heik must have some savings from his military service, especially since he worked as a salesperson. Such a conversation was not to our hero's liking, and he began to object. But the sergeant became bolder and started asserting that he wasn't asking for money for nothing. It was a loan, and he would return it soon. Kang Woo Heik simply listened meekly to his comrade's arguments. And at that moment he mentioned that his salary would come very soon, literally in a couple of days, and asked him to help him out. In the end, our hero gave in and paid for the purchase with his bank card. Hyun-Yoon-chan was ecstatic. There was no end to his happiness. He shouted that the baby crew was now his. He ran into the crowd, and our hero tried to find out when he could expect the debt to be repaid. But he only received a few curt phrases in response. One of them instructed our hero not to address the sergeant in the presence of women. The audacious companion was already in the crowd, shouting and holding the champagne over his head, having a great time. The bewildered young man still stood at the bar holding a bottle of beer, muttering to himself that Hyun-Yoon-chan hadn't changed a bit, and then he started calling him various derogatory words. But after a moment, he thought that now he no longer had to hold back. But looking at the crowd of revelers and contemplating, he decided that it was better to leave everything as it was. Because when he gets angry, misfortune follows. And it had always been that way. He recalled himself standing covered in blood over a man's body, who also lay in a pool of blood. But it was the man's blood staining our hero's clothes. Kang Woo Heik stood in a corner of the nightclub observing what was happening. He decided it was better to stay calm because what was done couldn't be undone, and he ordered himself to hold on. Without touching the bottle of beer, the young man decided to leave. As he headed towards the exit, he hoped that he would never cross paths with the arrogant sergeant again. However, it still hadn't sunk in his mind how 300,000 won had gone to waste. And after some time, his attention was drawn to a bottle of beer purchased at the nightclub bar. He was thinking that a similar brand in the store cost 2,500 won, but he decided to check. While he was contemplating this, a girl was flying towards him. Judging by her appearance, one could think she had also come to the nightclub, but for some reason she was running away from someone and screaming to be let go. But a mature man held her hand, smiling from ear to ear and gripping her wrist tightly. He ordered her to retract her claws, but asked the man not to use such hurtful words. He wondered why the girl refused free drinks, and from her behavior it was clear that she wanted to leave. Next to the man, there was a glass with some drink. The man was offering him to sit down and try the drink. He suggested forgetting about problems and enjoying leisure time with him. The girl was terrified. Such behavior from men in nightclubs was not uncommon. The girl was already screaming for help and calling for security. But it amused the man. He believed that the girl was pretending to be a troublemaker, which only fueled his interest in her. But after a moment, he stood up and pointed to two men standing by the door, saying that he knew those thugs. The girl was already desperate. The man gradually lost his composure and ordered her to stop getting on his nerves and just accept his invitations, promising that she wouldn't get hurt. The girl begged not to be touched and screamed for help. As all these actions were taking place near our hero, naturally, he noticed everything, and in an instant, the bottle of beer in his hand shattered against the man's head who was harassing the girl. The man turned crimson with anger. The beer glass was shattered, and its contents splattered on his face. His expression seemed stone-like. The man immediately released the girl's wrist, which already had bruises from his strong grip. The girl ran away to a safe distance from the two, shouting that the man was sick and she would call the police. But the man and our hero stood facing each other, and horror was visible on his face. The man, scratching the spot where he was hit, started interrogating Kang Woo Heik, trying to understand if the young man knew who he had attacked. Our hero probably realized his mistake and started apologizing, then tried to say something else, but his sentence was interrupted. The incoming blow from the man didn't allow him to finish his sentence. The man shouted that apologies alone would not be enough. The blow was so strong that our hero even stumbled to the side. Inside the club, people started noticing a fight, but some couldn't understand why the security guards were just standing there. The sergeant, on the other hand, turned around to figure out what was happening. He had already met a redhead girl and politely asked if something had happened. The girl simply pointed towards the fight. At that moment, the fight was in full swing. Well, if you could call it a fight. The man who had attacked the girl was relentlessly beating our hero, who offered no resistance. No one could understand why he wasn't fighting back since he was completely defenseless. The sergeant stood next to the girl, silently watching. Meanwhile, the young lady was expressing her worries aloud, unable to comprehend why no one was helping, and if everyone would just stand there and watch. Hyun Yoon-chan decided to find a way out of the situation by suggesting they go somewhere else. But the girl couldn't understand how that was possible given the circumstances. However, the man managed to avoid the question by saying that he disliked violence. Almost pushing the girl towards the exit, he continued saying that there was no point in witnessing such cruelty. Meanwhile, our hero was receiving more and more blows. The man kept raining punches on him, saying that he was a disgusting little puppy who didn't deserve a single punch from him. But it seemed that these cruel actions brought immense pleasure to the malicious man. He continued mockingly asking if our hero enjoyed getting punched in the face and not reacting. Standing over Kang Woo Heik majestically, as if he were a god, he asked why our hero didn't respond and then suggested that he wasn't worth his attention. At that moment, our hero was completely beaten up but still appeared spirited. Looking at his opponent, he smirked and asked if the man had calmed down. If he had, then he should let go, and they could peacefully part ways. It seemed that the furious man's eyes were about to burst with rage. Well, for some reason, he released our hero and agreed. Afterward, the young man, putting his hand on his heart, thanked his opponent. After a while, our hero muttered to himself something like, "Thank God this time there were no casualties." But the malicious man, clearly determined to continue, soon had brass knuckles with spikes gleaming on his fingers. The man lunged at our hero, extending his hand with the brass knuckles and shouting that he would now see what this accessory was capable of. In an instant, the spikes were right by our hero's eyes. At that moment, he thought that enough was enough. With all his might, the young man pushed away his opponent. For a moment, the thought crossed his mind right after his body reacted instantly. The people nearby were shocked, to say the least. Blood from the thrown man splattered on them. Meanwhile, in her office, a girl sat calmly, completely fitting the establishment. Distracted from her work, she asked into the void, "What's that noise?" She assumed that some couple had gotten into a scuffle. This girl was the main manager of the Persic Club, and her name was Jo Yu-bin. At that moment, our hero stood in the pose where he had thrown his opponent and watched as he flew through the air, splattering blood in all directions. After a while, the young man seemed to awaken from what had happened. Everyone around admired him, and some tried to ask each other what had just happened, but the young man simply remained silent. The security guard standing by the door only woke up after everything had already happened. One of them started shouting at the others to move faster. They rushed to the bloodied man lying on the ground and tried to determine if he was okay. But there was silence in response. So the security guards asked for no one to remain silent. After a while, one of them ordered the rest to catch the scoundrel, meaning our hero. But our hero no longer looked so distraught. He stared at his fist and first cursed everything that had happened, because once again, everything had gone in a vicious circle, despite his efforts to avoid trouble. However, he had a strange feeling. At that moment, a crowd of enraged security guards was rushing towards him. But what would happen next? At that time, the club's manager was sitting in her office, playing a computer game. On the monitor, there was an image of a wise man with a caption mentioning the Three Kingdoms, which represented historical chronicles of the Three Kingdoms period, from 189 to the 280s. As the girl looked at the monitor, where the recording of the unification of all worlds was visible, she spoke aloud, mentioning how they had sworn to each other under the peach tree to be brothers. Then she exclaimed that it was a success, and continued to say that they had written about the maximum difficulty of this game, but it was not challenging to complete. After that, placing her hand on the mouse, the girl began to search for something. muttering about which mode to try to break. In an instant, her door was being pounded by a security guard with no face, calling her by a strange name and saying that there was trouble on the floor below. The girl lazily responded, asking not to call her sister and stating her name as Cho Yu-bin. The security guard continued speaking, apologizing for their incompetence and claiming that they couldn't tolerate delays, while the heroine speculated that the strange sound she had heard earlier might have come from there. Then she asked, could it be the mischief of that nasty Juan Aura again, and suggested simply standing by without interfering, or he would get even more agitated. But the security guard interrupted her, not allowing her to speak. He almost shouted, saying that it was the first time he had seen someone manage to knock him down. With his back turned to the security guard, the manager was in shock. She couldn't say anything in response, then turned her head and asked the security guard how it was possible. Meanwhile, the police had arrived at the nightclub, but they were stuck at the entrance, facing two guards who seemed like they had never slept and were very, very tired. One of the policemen assumed that they didn't want to let them in, while another mentioned that they had recently received numerous reports of disturbances inside the establishment, and they had to check the situation. However, the guards remained silent, and then one of the policemen exclaimed in disappointment that they were uncooperative guys. After these words, one of the guards said that he didn't know what they were talking about, as everything was in order. After that, he asked them not to interfere with their work. The policemen clearly didn't expect such a turn of events, so they even asked again. One of the law enforcement officers lost his temper and started calling the guards despicable gangsters, then asked if they thought the police were some kind of joke. One of the guards boldly replied that even if that were the case, what would happen next? The situation became tense. The police officer finally lost his temper and began to shout, asking them to go with him to the station, but a fight was about to break out. But just in time, the manager of the club arrived and stood between the guards and the policemen. Smiling, she addressed the policeman, saying that it was the first time she had encountered law enforcement on her premises, and then she suggested that it must be very difficult to patrol at night. The policeman clenched his fists, seemingly not hearing her at all, while the guard standing behind the girl was genuinely surprised by what was happening. The girl almost embraced the police officer, introduced herself, and said she was the club's manager. She expressed her pleasure at meeting him, and then the second policeman intervened, saying that he was confident they could find common ground with her. The girl turned her head towards him and cheerfully exclaimed that they hadn't seen each other in a long time, addressing him as Sergeant Park. Sergeant Park calmly began talking to the girl, addressing her as Miss Yu. Then he asked her not to misunderstand him, but various complaints had been sent regarding robbery and sexual harassment. The girl remained completely calm with a smile on her face and replied that everything was clear. Then the girl began to speak, stating that someone had decided to play an unpleasant joke and tarnish the reputation of her business with false reports. During her speech, the girl showed 2 envelopes to the policeman. She still smiled, asking if they thought the same way as she did. The men looked at the envelopes in astonishment. This action surprised them, and they even asked again. And in a few moments, these 3 satisfied guys bid farewell. Holding the envelopes in their hands, the policeman said that they expected nothing less, as this girl was constantly being targeted. They decided to go and grab a snack, and the manager advised them to take care of themselves. From the earpiece in the girl's ear, a dialogue between the guards could be heard, as they ordered to return to headquarters because the situation had been resolved. The girl, to hide her anger, simply smiled and thought about how she had hired brainless idiots. After the police officers left, the girl took out a cigarette, and the guard hurried to light it for her. At that time, the girl asked where their main troublemaker was. The guard replied that he had been severely beaten, and they had moved him to the staff room. In that room, our hero lay curled up on the floor while the guards kicked him relentlessly. Entering the room, the manager lit a cigarette and observed the scene as the guys beat him, and the guards yelled at him, calling him scum and questioning how he could have done such a thing. She asked to review the surveillance camera footage, but the chief guard said that they had just confiscated the film and needed some time. Approaching the couch where the beaten man lay, his body covered in multiple bruises and dried blood, Cho Yu-bin couldn't understand how Hwan Woon, the mafia's best fighter, had turned into a convulsing, dying wretch. After some time, everyone present was able to watch the camera footage, specifically the moment when our hero brought down the mafia fighter with a single blow. The girl removed Hwan Woon's clothes to examine his injuries more closely. This action caused the man to scream in pain. After witnessing this, the girl froze for a moment. A guard approached her and asked what they should do. The girl didn't understand the essence of the question and ordered the military personnel to take him to the hospital. while the others should stop kicking him. She wanted to ask our hero a few questions and ordered the rest to leave briefly. The guards began to move as a crowd, some carrying the fighter on their shoulders, while others were left wondering what would happen next. Kang Woo Heik leaned against a table and Cho Yu-bin moved away from him, speaking with her cigarette in hand, saying that she hoped no extra ears would be eavesdropping on them now. Our hero didn't understand the meaning of this phrase. Then the girl sat down on the couch and extinguished her cigarette in the ashtray. She began to ask our hero if he was the son of another clan, and if they had sent him here on purpose. Again, the young man didn't understand. He couldn't answer anything, but after a moment he apologized and said that he truly didn't understand what she was talking about. The managers of the club were momentarily stunned, looking directly at our hero. Then, completely relaxed, she asked them to forget about it. She said that she should be the one apologizing for her boy's misconduct. Later, she kindly asked if he was in pain anywhere, and if so, she would immediately cover the cost of his treatment. Our hero was shocked by this turn of events, so he simply sat opposite her and listened attentively. Then he raised his hand and said that there was still a small problem. Looking at his shirt, he mentioned that it was ruined and worn out from the kicks. The girl was so surprised that she wondered if that was all that concerned him. Then she simply said that they would buy him new clothes since they were inexpensive, and she hoped they could rely on their agreement. Then the lady began to mumble, but almost immediately scolded herself and said, addressing our hero, that they were getting to the point and offered him to work for her from now on. Kang Woo Heik was shocked by this proposal and asked if she was joking. The girl seemed slightly nervous and asked if he had any objections. The young man replied that he didn't, and the girl said that she knew he worked at a 24-hour store due to a lack of funds. Our hero explained his reaction by saying that this offer was quite unexpected. The girl had already stood up and was heading somewhere while mentioning that her friend, whom he had taken down, had at least 4 broken ribs. She continued by saying that he would need about 8 weeks to recover, and asked if he could pay for his hospitalization. Our hero was horrified because we know about Kang Woo Heik's financial situation. The girl stood over the hero with a happy face and began to speak, saying that a great opportunity had come up and advised him not to miss it. She promised to cover the hospital bills and even offered a salary 10 times higher than what he earned in his meager stall. The young man couldn't respond to such an offer, but this reaction seemed incomprehensible to the girl. So she asked why he was surprised and if he really needed an explanation. However, our hero said that everything had been perfectly clear. Then he said that he understood one thing. He didn't know why they suddenly offered such a thing to him, but he understood that if he joined their alliance, it meant becoming a mafioso. This reaction amused the girl, but not in a positive way, rather she expected such a response. Then she said that such a reaction was more obvious, and presumed that the young man was feeling tremendous pressure at the moment. Our hero simply stood there silently, staring at a fixed point, while the girl went somewhere, taking a cigarette from the pack. After she brought the cigarette to her lips, she asked the guy if he planned to return home and continue with his routine, working like a horse at 1,000 miles per hour. Then she continued, saying that he was the owner of incredible talent but was running away from it like a cat scared of water. She advised him to live as he pleased and find 100 justifications to shield himself from his own brilliance. Our hero couldn't answer at first, but then he got agitated and started asking where she knew all this from. But Cho Yu-bin calmly said that she simply didn't like him. Therefore, she offered once again to come under her wing and promised to take care of him. Our hero just stared at her. There was a hint of exhaustion in his gaze. Then the lady asked him to think it over. After that, she gave him a choice. In the first case, he would continue hiding in the gray masses, struggling for pennies, or he could take a step towards a happy ticket. As she brought the lighter closer to him, she ordered him to choose. Our hero was clearly perplexed. He didn't know how to react to this. The girl was losing patience and urged him to make a decision quickly. She still held the lighter in the air and rushed him, as if her hand was about to fall off. In just a moment, the lighter ended up in the young man's hand, lighting the manager's cigarette. In response, the girl stated her name but asked to be called Nuji. Lighting her cigarette, the girl said that they were born in different times and would likely die on different days, but there was no need to worry and give it their all. With a sense of responsibility, our hero declared that he had given his consent and was ready to work diligently. The delighted manager instructed him to go home immediately, and our hero obeyed, saying he would do just that. But it seemed that only after agreeing, he understood the essence of the situation and was surprised. And the happy girl told him to go and rest. As the young man stood by the door, he turned around and agreed once again before saying goodbye. As he opened the door, the guy was shocked. There stood a group of guards, as if they had been waiting for him to come out. As soon as he appeared, they all started shouting and telling each other not to let him escape. Almost immediately, everyone fell silent and turned towards the door. A girl appeared and pushed him forward with a kind smile. Slamming the door shut, the guy was left alone with enraged guards. They were rushing at him in a crowd. At one moment, there were multiple fists in front of his face. And in that instant, the guy started hitting all the guards standing in front of him. They were flying in different directions from the blows, and it felt to our hero like everything was happening as if in a dream. However, one of the guards managed to strike our hero. He yelled loudly and cursed. But almost immediately, Kang Woo Heik grabbed the hand of that guard. At that moment, he was quite surprised. Our hero thought he should start doing what they were saying. He flew with his hand extended towards the angry mob of guards. In any other fight with such a large number of attackers, there would be no trace of a person left, but not in this case. Our hero understood all of this and therefore apologized. Meanwhile, behind the door, the manager calmly sat in the room, smoking a cigarette and holding a phone in her hand. It seemed she didn't understand what was happening behind the door. At one point, the girl heard something and extinguished her cigarette. Opening the door to the room, she was shocked. In front of her lay guards beaten half to death. One of them apologized and said that they let the guy slip away. The girl was not at all upset, but rather the opposite. Looking at her phone, she said that the loss was insignificant. And then she mentioned that the guards couldn't even find his address. So she was looking at the phone screen and saying that this little gadget would definitely help. But what kind of gadget was she talking about? And on the phone, all the movements of our hero were visible. But how was that possible? As Kang Woo Heik walked home, he pondered over what a strange day it had been. Something was glowing under his hood. What could it be? It was a tracking chip that had been placed there when the manager led our hero to the door. But what would happen next, we will find out in the next chapter. Approaching his home, the guy started working the intercom to open the entrance door. Entering his apartment, he immediately threw his clothes into the laundry. Then he went for a hot shower. He hoped to release all his tension with the hot water and also take some time to think. Lathering his head with shampoo, the young man started thinking about what he had done, and whether it was worth silently agreeing and leaving as they said. After he stepped out, he used a towel to dry his head. In this chapter, there were more questions than answers, and one of them was why he was suddenly offered to become part of the mafia in the first place. This question troubled our hero the most. Squeezing the towel in his hand, he tried to understand if he had done the right thing. Recalling the situation when he was looking at his fist and the angry guards flying behind him, the guy once again felt a surge of excitement. But then he realized how exhausted he was and decided to take a nap. He turned off the lights. As he lay in his bed, the guy, as usual before falling asleep, put his phone on charge and was glad that at least he hadn't broken it. Almost drifting off to sleep, Kang Woo Heik thought about how she had forgotten to take the contacts with her. And as he fell asleep, he thought about how he needed those contacts in case he wanted to get in touch with them. But if they weren't there, what would he do? But next to his bed was the same girl from the nightclub. Seeing that the guy had woken up, she asked something. She looked just as cheerful and kind. Our hero said he had dreamt of becoming a gangster, and then he stared at the girl questioningly. Well, she started to explain, saying she had called and knocked, but nobody opened the door. And then she asked if he always slept like a log. Then she leaned very close to the young man's face, and with a smile suggested that the previous night had been so intense that he didn't hear anything while he slept. The guy jumped and started asking how she ended up in his apartment. But it seemed the whole situation amused the young girl. She tried to think of the best way to express it. And jokingly, she said she was passing by from work and decided to drop by. Then she smirked and turned to our hero, talking about the door lock. She advised him to get a more expensive and reliable one. The young people moved to the kitchen. Our hero was so surprised that he lost his words and simply observed the girl's actions. She opened one of the cupboards, suggesting they chat over a cup of coffee. But the cupboard was empty, and realizing that our hero didn't drink coffee, she asked if he was against it. Then, as if nothing had happened, the girl approached her handbag, saying it was fine that there was no coffee, because she recently bought instant coffee packets. While she was trying to find those packets, our hero asked her what she was trying to achieve. Our hero couldn't calm down, so he continued to ask why she invaded his home, especially after giving him an ultimatum yesterday, and what her goal was in general. The girl didn't pay much attention to it and demonstrated the found packets. To the question about her goal, she replied that she wanted to unite the whole world, and then she asked if he would laugh if she answered that way. Kang Woo Heik didn't understand, but Cho Yu-bin continued, saying that talking about such grand scales might be too much. She decided to call it a union of nations. Sometime later, the girl, in a more serious and understanding tone, said that what she was saying now sounded truly ridiculous. And hearing such things from an anonymous, statusless girl, the manager of a club, talking about such serious matters, even she found it funny. The guy and the girl stood facing each other. There was an awkward silence for a moment. The girl smiled and ordered the guy to shut up and make a tasty drink, while pulling out 2 coffee sachets. He brewed 2 cups of coffee. Sitting at the table, the girl began to drink her coffee, praising our hero. She said he had the talent to become a future barista. A moment later, the girl asked what they had decided. Our hero replied that they had decided to focus on the connection between Nuna's schemes and the discussion in the club. The manager praised the guy's excellent attitude. However, she wanted to ask a question first. Had he ever heard of the company Yuhan? The girl showed the logo of that company on her phone's screen. But our hero said he had only heard about it a few times in the news. And then he expressed that it was a massive gangster corporation that even the police didn't touch. The girl was thrilled. She started showering our hero with congratulations, saying that now he could proudly call himself a member of her group. She mentioned that under the chairman, there was a vice chairman, followed by the branch director, and then she came next. Then, staring at her phone, she mumbled, "My crazy submissive little dog." She also showed a portrait of the chairman of that company named Yu Han Seon. The girl believed that since there was a new addition to their family, our hero should know about it face to face. When she showed the portrait, she described him as an extraordinary old man who conquered the country in the 90s and has been ruling for 30 years. Then she corrected herself and said there was a mistake. She showed an article stating that the chairman was urgently hospitalized and would require an extended period of rehabilitation. And below that, it proposed to take his place. The girl continued. She said everyone was holding their breath, but if the old man steps down, what might happen? Not receiving an answer, she said that with the loss of the owner, any beast would break free from its chain and escape from under his crown. Still sitting at the table with their coffee cups, the girl said that the longer tranquility lasts, the faster chaos will come. She quoted a line from a computer game. Our hero was listening to her attentively. Putting her cup down on the table, she said that a challenge becomes synonymous with an opportunity. The girl was determined. She declared that she intended to seize this chance and make her way to the top deliberately, and she chose our hero to assist in carrying out the plan. He was clearly shocked by what he heard. He asked how he ended up being involved, but the girl got a little annoyed and ordered him to figure it out himself because it wasn't difficult. When she realized that Kang Woo Heik genuinely didn't understand, the manager started using her fingers to demonstrate and explained that before their grandfather's passing, she needed to take action before the director got to the throne with his looters. Then, addressing our hero, she asked if he truly believed he could just stand aside and watch. The girl was losing her temper but continued to say that he was already dreaming about being the king, sniffing out the right moment. In conclusion, she said that due to Hyok's lightning-fast reaction back then, he was chosen. Pointing at our hero, the girl continued to say that no matter what he did, no one would ever suspect her. He was truly surprised by such a turn of events. The girl said that the young man would become her secret weapon. The guy returned to work. Kang Woo Heik decided to quit the 24-hour store. His boss was surprised by the sudden conversation, but congratulated him on finding a new opportunity and gave him permission to leave. Today was his last working day. He stood behind the counter serving a customer. After scanning all the items, he informed the customer of the total amount, 4,500 won. After our hero completed the transaction with the customer, they left. He was lost in his thoughts. He didn't know what to do with the envelope sticking out of his back pocket. He remembered how he got that envelope in the first place. The manager, when she came to him on his way out, mentioned something about handing him an item, but he completely forgot about it. Our hero was surprised and asked what it was when he saw the girl handing him the envelope. Cho Yubin smiled sweetly and said it was an advance payment, 5 million won in cash. Our hero took the envelope in his hands and still couldn't believe what was happening, so he didn't say anything. Meanwhile, the girl was already heading towards the door, saying that the amount seemed to be around 10 times his salary. And then she mentioned that he would also receive a bonus for his hard work. After all that was said, she turned around with that mischievous smile again and said it was time for her to go, but she would contact him soon. She also mentioned that her number was already in our hero's phone, signed as Nuna Bini with a heart next to it. Our hero remembered all of this while standing behind the counter. Afterward, he became curious about what tasks the club manager would assign him, but he realized that in any case, carrying around a bunch of money was very inconvenient. So he went to the ATM to deposit all the cash into his bank account. However, the maximum deposit limit was 1 million won. Therefore, he concluded that he would have to divide the cash into 5 parts and use the machine that many times. He had just started counting when that arrogant and cheeky sergeant appeared behind him. With a smirk, the sergeant jokingly asked if he was also working today. But how the story will unfold from here, we will find out in the next chapter. The girl was sitting in the car, resting her head on her hand. She looked very exhausted. The driver who was taking her informed her that they were almost there. The young lady yawned. Seeing this, the driver asked if she hadn't slept at all. In response to this question, the girl replied with a question, asking how he would feel in her place. After all, they called someone who worked nights to go somewhere in broad daylight. The driver affirmatively stated that the girl should have free time in the mornings. Cho Yu-bin replied that she usually spends that time shopping. She mentioned that she managed to buy quality items at a good price. But a moment later, she asked when her sleep problems became his concern. Because of that, the driver apologized and said that the situation was quite unusual. The dialogue ended with those words. They arrived at the branch of the Yuhan Corporation in the city of Pyonghwa. The girl sat in the car and touched up her face using cosmetic products. But the driver decided to strike up a conversation with her again, this time trying to warn her. After all, if she made the slightest mistake in front of the branch manager. But he couldn't finish his sentence as the girl started to be amused by his concern. While continuing to apply her makeup, the club manager asked him not to do that anymore, as she never made mistakes. The girl burst into the office and greeted everyone enthusiastically. She mentioned that it had been a while since she last came to work. After all, darkness reigns there day and night. Then she suggested doing some renovation. The driver felt ashamed of his owner's behavior. He even covered his face and recalled the words she had said in the car, specifically telling him not to worry. In the room, 3 serious-looking individuals were sitting, and one stood next to the most important person. The girl thought that there was nothing impressive about the interior, but the people there were rather gloomy. One of the men jumped up and started calling our heroine names, then tried to find out if she realized who was gathered there. He told her to stop talking nonsense. It was the branch director, Lee Chang-yul. The girl's expression changed, and now she spoke seriously. She asked why he was being so rude and then mentioned that he probably forgot who paid for the treatment of his subordinate. But in response to this argument, the man asked in which club his subordinate had been injured. The girl calmly mentioned that it was at Cable Club, and then said that he, in fact, incited the disturbance on her territory. Did he really believe that by going to someone else's club and causing a scene, his salon would prosper? And then she called him an idiot. The man was furious. He called our heroine a mop and said she was asking for trouble. It seemed like his neck veins were about to burst. After a moment, the man sitting at the head of the table ordered them to stop. They froze in the same positions in which they had been shouting at each other a moment ago. This man looked too intimidating, like a pile of stones with a beard sitting behind the table. He talked about how it seemed they had 4 main figures now, but a couple of them were constantly at odds. What kind of example would they set for their subordinates? These words were spoken by the new branch, Gonbaek Gyu. He continued, saying that he had repeatedly stated that they were a family. Can relatives really argue with each other? It seemed that in his heart, he was not as fierce as he appeared on the outside. The two of them lowered their heads, and the man apologized. Gonbaek Gyu immediately moved on to business and said that he would like to hear an explanation of what had happened. Cho Yu-bin ordered her bodyguard to leave. The girl began her dialogue by assuming that even if she told everything in order, she probably wouldn't reveal anything new. Standing at the end of the table, the girl said that she simply watched the scene unfold, where Hwan Unu clashed with an unknown guy whom she had never seen before. She then demanded that the guys catch him, but they failed. Then she turned to Lee Chang-yul and asked when his goons had degraded back to being green rookies. Upon hearing this, the man asked her not to mock him, called her a bitch, and then said that he couldn't vouch for others. However, he himself rarely loses fights. Then the girl speculated that the boy was quite agile. She continued to speak, saying that even though they had a couple of people stronger than Hwan Unu, hardly anyone could finish a fight with him. As far as she knew, there was only one person there capable of that. Looking at the man sitting at the head, she said that this person was right in front of her. The man pondered something. The branch director, Park Oh-jun, said that now, when comparing them side by side, it was not surprising why the brothers missed this agile guy. After these words, the branch director, An Yo-han, asked where he suddenly appeared from. Then he suggested that perhaps someone from another place sent him to hinder their business from growing. The girl smirked. She understood that everyone had taken her bait, but then she simply said that it was quite possible. Then the girl took out her phone and started speaking, saying that to confirm this fact, they first needed to catch the rat and tapped on her phone. She sent a message to everyone present, continuing to talk about how since her boys had suffered greatly, she lacked people to send in search of the guy. So she wanted to ask for help in capturing him. The message contained a photo of our hero. Therefore, she asked for help again, emphasizing that they were a family. At that moment, the brazen sergeant, who was standing at the ATM, wanted something from our hero again. Before he could turn around, the guy put the envelope with money into his inner pocket. and in response to the question of whether he was working today, he answered in agreement. Our hero turned around and asked why he decided to drop by. The former sergeant replied that he was just going to buy cigarettes and then asked if there were any problems. He continued to say that they had missed each other at the nightclub and hadn't crossed paths again. Then he asked if he had a good time before going home, but he thought to himself that he looked fresh even after the beating. Our hero simply replied, "Yeah, something like that." But deep down he was very worried about his former comrade noticing the envelope of money. But after a moment, he commanded himself to calm down. But it wasn't that easy. The brazen guy took out the envelope and asked what was inside. As he touched it, it seemed incredible to him because at first glance, it looked like there were more than 100 bills in the envelope. Well, our hero was horrified. The guy opened the envelope and asked where all that money came from, wondering if he made a living from gambling. And to himself, he thought that it might be compensation for his injuries. Our hero tried to say something, but the brazen guy interrupted him, saying that it didn't matter where the money came from because they were already there. And the most important thing was that now, our hero was the owner of that money. He then speculated that with such a bundle, he could forget about expenses for some time. Still, Kang Woo Heik dared to ask for the money back. He continued to say that it was his money, and it was not polite to touch someone else's without permission. It seemed that the interlocutor didn't expect that. He definitely didn't like it. But after a moment, he returned everything, surprising our hero. Seeing the young man's reaction, the former sergeant asked if he really thought he was going to rob him and run away. But Kang Woo Heik said that he never expected that. But he still didn't understand what the catch was. The former sergeant went to the shelf with tobacco products and brought a pack of cigarettes with 3mm, the purple raisin. Our hero realized that the former sergeant probably wouldn't give up so easily, but there was no choice, and he had to bring the requested tobacco. So he set off to get it. Approaching the shelf, he began to take out the cigarettes and then asked if he had done everything right. He received a positive nod in response, but he still couldn't wrap his head around what had happened. He suggested that there was still a trace of conscience in that sergeant, and after he punched, he said that they needed to pay 4,500 won for that pack. But the brazen sergeant, who hadn't received his salary yet, was about to leave. As he left, he promised to repay the debt in full, along with the amount for the drinks. He mentioned that he didn't run out of money, so he wouldn't become poor. Our hero didn't like it at all. His expression noticeably changed, but he didn't say anything. The brazen sergeant started to leave and at that moment thanked our hero. Kang Woo Heik, standing behind the counter, thought that the guy was simply afraid to mess with someone tougher and called him a dog. But after a moment, he thought that when the shift ended, they wouldn't see each other anymore, so there was no need to stress over lost pocket change. Our hero was glad that at least the sergeant didn't reach the envelope. He decided to make the deposit later. His phone vibrated in his pocket, and it was a message from Nunabini. The girl exited the corporation building. She stretched and rejoiced in her freedom. She didn't understand why they had dragged it out for so long when the whole conversation could have been done in 5 minutes. A security guard approached her and asked what they had decided at the meeting. She asked him what he thought himself. Then she answered that, of course, they would all catch the boy together. The security guard helped her light a cigarette and talked about how everything was good if she managed to get out of it. The girl agreed, but she mentioned that they would need to bring 200 million won, which was just a small sum. At first, the security guard wanted to agree that it was indeed peanuts, but then it dawned on him what that amount meant, and he was horrified. The young lady said that this figure was supposedly mentioned for hiring guys from other prefectures. Later, she said that she understood his surprise. After all, it was the club's revenue for 2 months. So what was the point of complaining and recalculating when they had signed up for it? She continued, saying that if they failed, and the plan fell apart, they would deduct the money from her account and asked him not to worry about her pocket. The security guard understood everything, and he offered to drive the girl to the club. But she didn't want to, and decided to take a walk in the neighborhood first, and then go home on her own. The girl rushed off, shouting that they could manage one day without her. The security guard was horrified. The girl walked down the street, smoking a cigarette, while the security guard called out to her to wait. But Nuna was completely lost in her thoughts. She understood that first and foremost, she needed to strategize where to go next. She recalled the meeting when they summarized everything. It was said that all the branch's forces would be directed towards capturing the boy, and Cho Yu-bin would cover the expenses. And after these words, it was stated that if no one had any objections, the discussion would be over. One of the directors, hearing all this, said aloud that they could have asked for more money. The girl sitting next to him said that her business was already hanging by a thread, and as they were leaving, One of the directors, namely An Yo-han, stood up for our heroine, saying that he should show his generosity for once in his life since director Cho showed sincerity by investing to the maximum. The girl, walking ahead, said that they only brought stress and she was going to take a break. But they asked her to stay. The man sitting at the head suggested a brief one-on-one conversation. The girl helped him light his cigarette, and at that moment, he said that she hadn't let him light it like that in a long time. The girl agreed. He began his dialogue by talking about how much they respected her. The girl said that she knew, and thanks to the branch head, she held a prestigious position. Plus, the bar's income had been breaking records for several days in a row. The man laughed, and then he said that her business methods were always excellent. He continued, saying that she skillfully used advantages and loopholes while never losing her smile. She wasn't afraid to give a lot, and as a result, she expected to double her capital at least. The girl standing by the table and listening to all this considered those words as a compliment. The branch head continued to speak, saying that he would help catch the young man first because people who get involved with their subordinates must pay the price. And in an instant, the man became furious. He started talking about how she thought she could trick him with just a bubble. The girl approached a certain establishment and thought about how perceptive Jossie was. As she opened the door, she thought that in any case, she wouldn't be caught red-handed. Passing by the reception, she asked the guy sitting there if someone was already in room 3, and they replied that a guy had just entered. The girl thought that, ultimately, the answer regarding the future depended on the further usefulness of her tool. Opening the door, our hero was there, and upon seeing him, she said that he was there quite early. Kang Woo Heik in turn greeted her. The girl entered the room and plopped down on the bed. She asked our hero if he had quit the little shop. He replied in agreement and said that he had closed his last shift today. Taking out the envelope with the money, the guy started talking about how he was surprised when he received it and was shocked into silence. But is it really true that she is helping him with such an extravagant sum? And holding the stack of money right in front of her. He said that everything was still intact. He hadn't spent a penny. The girl ordered him not to worry because if he continued working for her, this pile would seem like nothing, and he would soon feel it himself. Then, with a teasing tone, she began to talk about how, even though he's modest, she noticed that he loosened up a bit. Maybe he bought something tasty or a game. Or perhaps he got himself some new clothes. The guy became puzzled again and asked what she meant. He started talking about how he carried them around without using them at all. The girl stood up and took our hero by the hand. Not understanding what was happening, she asked Kang Woo Heik about it. Looking at the stack of money, the girl said that there was less than 5 million, and it all looked as if there were 4,700,000 won. But where did 300,000 won disappear to? We will find out about it together in the next chapter. The guy started defending himself, saying that it was very unexpected and he had already explained what happened. But the girl said that at first glance, it was noticeable that the pack had become thinner, and then she suggested that if he didn't believe her, he should count it himself and see. Our hero became flustered and started counting the stack of money. Cho Yubin just stood there and observed what was happening. And when our hero was approaching the point where the money was running out and there was no sign of 5 million, the girl suggested that he had probably already figured out what was going on. Angered, the guy squeezed the stack and couldn't understand where the majority of the money had gone. Sitting on the bed, the girl speculated about an old army comrade. She said that there were many similar thugs in this area. However, there might be problems in dealing with that scoundrel. She started talking about how she didn't just call him to this place without reason. They needed to figure something out quickly. Our hero stood before the girl as if he were a schoolboy who hadn't done his homework for the teacher. But the girl said that there was no time to be distracted by other things, and she understood his anger and dissatisfaction. However, she hoped that the young man could focus on more important matters now. Once again, our hero couldn't say anything. After a while, he simply suggested letting it go. The girl smiled and asked him what he meant. It dawned on her what he meant, so she asked if he had gone crazy. Did he decide to let the scumbag go unpunished? Even if that's what he wanted, she agreed with them. Then she said that her people would not tolerate stealing, and of course she would teach him a lesson. The young man was slightly shocked. The girl continued to talk about how, at the moment, she was in a hurry and had to put off the second course for later. It seemed that our hero was completely confused. But a little later, the girl asked if Kang Woo Heik understood, and he replied in agreement. He said that he would first carry out her order and then deal with Yang Chun-hoon. The girl liked his determination, and after that she asked if the name belonged to their thief. Our hero replied in agreement. And at that moment, the nightclub manager received a call and started doing something on the phone. After a while, she opened a photo where the former comrade of our hero was smoking and chatting happily with someone. Where were you at that time? This very sergeant was talking on the phone, He asked if the person he was calling was taking a break today, and then answered that, for example, he was taking a break today. Then he suggested having a drink together since they hadn't done that in a while, but he was told that they were busy today, so it was unlikely. While talking on the phone, Yang Chun-hoon was walking somewhere. He asked if any problems had arisen, but they asked him if he really didn't know what was going on. He replied that, of course, he had no information about their intrigues as an ordinary customer. They asked if he knew Hyeon Hwan-un. The sergeant replied that he had only heard the name, hadn't changed shifts, and hadn't crossed paths. And then they told him that this guy had messed with the wrong person. Now they were trying to identify and catch that scumbag. They had already sent a photo, so he suggested showing it to the sergeant. But he replied that he would hardly be able to identify the person's identity. He thought to himself that he was being dragged into trouble again. While he lit a cigarette, he felt sorry because he missed out on an easy fortune and had intended to have another drink. Afterward, he talked about encountering a fool, saying that he was so cowardly that he didn't dare to object after any of his actions. But the sergeant didn't know that at that moment, our hero was standing right behind him. A little earlier during the meeting with our hero, Cho Yu-bin took back her words and said to go beat up that thug right now. Our hero asked several times, then asked about urgent matters. But the girl in response asked if he no longer wanted revenge. His eyes were burning, and she cared about his well-being. The girl insisted. She said that one should never forget the effectiveness of carrying out an assignment. And in principle, she believed that it would be possible to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. The manager began to tell that one of her colleagues is Lee Kang-yeol, and when he gets angry, he can't distinguish truth from lies. Therefore, he needs to be infuriated even more so he would make more mistakes. As she talked about it, the girl was filled with happiness. In conclusion, she said that the rogue is an accomplice of her comrade enemy and helps attract customers for the growth of her own business. At first, she thought about doing things differently. However, since Kang Yeol is so annoyed by what is happening, there's no need to devise a strategy. Suddenly, she received a message saying that he was probably loitering at the intersection of the street again, and it was from a secret friend. The girl showed the content to our hero, saying that she didn't expect much from her informant. Then she said that his tormentor was nearby and ordered to find the bastard and show him where the crayfish hibernate. The guy didn't resist. He just said that he would go. But the girl turned him around as he reached the door. The girl decided to warn in advance that our hero shouldn't hold back at all. And there in the alley, the former comrade noticed our hero. Stuttering, he greeted our hero and affirmatively said that he was wandering around in that area. Before he could say anything else, a punch landed on his face. But our hero, looking at his former comrade screaming, simply replied that there was no need for answers to the questions anymore. Then something pulled him. He thought that he had been contemplating such a step for a very long time. Our hero approached the former comrade, who was already sitting and trying to stem the bleeding from his nose with his hand. He genuinely didn't understand why the hell he suddenly attacked. But our hero ordered him to shut up. He came closer, grabbed Yang Chun-hun by the collar, and demanded that he immediately return what he had stolen. The guy didn't hesitate, and took out the money from his pocket. And in his defense, he said that he was just joking, that he planned to fight later and return it, and then he swore. Our hero became even angrier after realizing that the amount was incomplete. Holding the former comrade close to the ground, he said that there was still a debt he owed at the bar. The young man for some reason remained silent. After a while, he managed to utter that he knew. And why did he say that if he allowed him to use the nearby mobile phone, he would pay off right away? Then he said that he honestly wasn't lying. He had recently received a raise. Our hero agreed and took the phone. He held the mobile phone to his former comrade and ordered him to complete the transfer within 30 seconds. And there he began to do something with the phone in his hands. Our hero stood nearby and spoke about how, if he tried to do anything strange, he would smash his face against the wall. But this comrade was smiling too slyly. As expected, he was calling his patron, and it was Hai Nim Jin Yun.